We know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one.
I know what's gone on previously in my previous prison sentences. I wrote a letter to my wife, and it was a detailing letter. Yeah.
You all right? It's all right. This is a letter to your wife from prison. What did you say?
To make sure they understood why I do what I do. And it's me believing that the worst will come.
That you will die in jail.
The worst will come, and I want my children to know that I haven't,
Donald Trump never holds back, and this time he's weighing in on the explosive claims made by Tommy Robinson from behind bars. Kier Starmer likely viewed his speech in Munich as a pivotal moment, a chance to present himself as a strong leader ready to restore Britain's global influence. However, instead of earning admiration, he encountered an unexpected setback. In front of world leaders, the US Vice President's response didn't just challenge him, it exposed a harsh reality he couldn't ignore.
Well, I heard his speech, and I tell you, you're talking about JD's speech, right?
Yes, sir.
I heard his speech, and he talked about freedom of speech, and I think it's true in Europe. It's losing. They're losing their wonderful right of freedom of speech. I see it. I mean, I thought he made a very good speech, actually.
This wasn't just a poorly received speech, it was a wake-up call, a sign that under Starmer, Britain's influence may be slipping. His leadership isn't as solid as he portrays, and even key allies are beginning to question his approach. When Kier Starmer took the stage in Munich, he had one clear objective: to reaffirm Britain's role as a global leader under his watch. His speech was filled with confident statements about democracy, international cooperation, and the UK's commitment to global stability. He emphasised strengthening ties with European allies, addressing security challenges, and ensuring Britain remained at the forefront of shaping the world's future.
That just come out of jail after 13 months had been encouraging his missus to behead her parents because they were kafar, non-believers. He spent 30 months in jail. He'd been encouraging and promoting ISIS terrorism. And they knew he was still a danger and a threat. That's why he was monitored 24 hours a day. He's only out of jail 2 days before he went and tried to kill people. Why has he been let out of jail? When we start treating these men, don't put them in prison with car thieves or violent offenders or drug dealers, because they're a whole new level. They are foreign fighters, enemy combatants at war with us. No amount to your pathetic de-radicalization bullshit programs that you put them on in prison changes their mind. They are followers of Muhammad. They are inflicting what he has told them to, backed up by scripture. This actual terrorist who just went on his killing spree, do you know what he actually said before he went to jail, when he got last sent to prison? He said that we can rape Yazidi women because it commands us to in the Quran. Now you all scratch your heads as to why 90% of grooming gang convictions are Muslim men. You know, we're not even allowed to ask the question if it's linked to scripture. Do you know how infuriating it is? And it's infuriating. Innocent people against that.
But here's the issue. Talk is easy. Starmer painted a vision of a strong and confident Britain, yet his leadership at home tells a different story. He aimed to prove he could collaborate with world leaders, but the reality is that many are already questioning whether he can actually follow through. At the conference, the focus was on security. Typically, that means external threats. Military leaders filled the room, and the Trump administration made its stance clear. While committed to European security and a reasonable resolution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Europe must take greater responsibility for its own defence. However, the biggest threat to Europe isn't Russia, China, or any foreign power. What's most concerning is Europe's own drift away from its core values.
So it doesn't matter. The British people are always going to thrive. They're always going to win out. And the more tyranny you put against them, the more backlash you're going to feel as the government. God bless Tommy Robinson. Free Tommy Robinson today.
Starmer positioned himself as a bridge builder, hoping to restore ties with Europe after Brexit. But does he have the influence to make it happen? Can he convince the world that Britain remains a major force when his own country faces economic struggles, social unrest, and increasing restrictions on free speech? This speech was meant to be a defining moment, a chance for Starmer to prove that Britain still holds weight on the global stage. Instead, it raised more doubts than reassurances. His vision may have looked promising on paper, but when put to the test, it clashed with the stark reality of his leadership.
Spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible. They're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. These are people who are trying to get some kind of vicarious thrill from street violence that people like Tommy Robinson promote. And those attacking Jess Phillips, who I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend, not protecting victims. Jess Phillips has done 1,000 times more than they've even dreamt about when it comes to protecting victims of sexual abuse throughout her entire career. And so just as I took on the criminal justice system and the institutions when I was chief prosecutor, I'm prepared to call out this for what it is. We've seen this playbook many times, whipping up of intimidation and threats of violence.
As the US Vice President responded, it became clear that Starmer's carefully crafted message wasn't landing as intended. Rather than projecting strength, he came across as a leader clinging to an image that no longer aligns with the realities of his government. When Starmer finished speaking, he may have expected a standard diplomatic nod or polite acknowledgement. Instead, he received something far worse. An unexpected public challenge that left him scrambling. On an international stage, the Vice President didn't just disagree, they exposed the disconnect between Starmer's rhetoric and Britain's current reality.
Hoping that the media will amplify it. Now, Jess Phillips does not need me or anybody else to speak on her behalf. But when the poison of the far right leads to serious threats to Jess Phillips and others, then in my book, a line has been crossed. I enjoy the cut and thrust of politics.
This wasn't a minor policy dispute, it was a direct contradiction that shattered the image Starmer had worked so hard to cultivate. Whether it was about the UK's global influence, its stance on free speech, or its role in international security, the Vice President's response made one thing clear. They weren't convinced. The message was undeniable. Under Starmer's leadership, Britain wasn't as strong, stable, or influential as he claimed. The room fell silent. Some diplomats exchanged knowing glances, others quickly jotted down notes, and a few seemed taken aback by the bluntness of the response. This wasn't just an uncomfortable moment, it was a public embarrassment.
Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, has been charged under the Terrorism Act.
He hugged supporters waiting outside for him, telling them he was there for telling the truth. Now, one of them asked what'll happen next, and he said, "I'll see what happens, mate. I don't expect to come back out here."
When the leader of a key ally openly questions your credibility, it doesn't just bruise your reputation, it undermines your influence on the global stage. Starmer may have tried to downplay the moment, but the damage was already done. This wasn't just an awkward exchange, it was a clear indication of the lack of confidence world leaders have in his leadership. If the US Vice President was willing to challenge him so openly, one can only imagine what's being said behind closed doors.
No one can tell me, so I know intentionally, and previously I've been locked in rooms with Muslims in prison, so I believe that. And then in that first week in the block.
What was meant to be Starmer's defining moment, a chance to showcase his strength on the international stage, ended with him looking unprepared, vulnerable, and completely out of his depth. Starmer wants to be seen as a strong global leader, but concerns about his leadership are growing both at home and abroad. His biggest challenge? Convincing the world that Britain remains a defender of democracy while his own government continues to restrict basic freedoms.
An irreversible path for Ukraine to NATO membership.
And you have backed away from that, to be absolutely clear.
No, obviously nobody was expecting that to be immediate. It was a pathway over time. But what
Under Starmer's leadership, free speech in the UK is facing increasing threats. Laws are being used to suppress dissenting voices, individuals have been arrested for silent prayer, social media users are being targeted by police for so-called hateful content, and new censorship laws have made it easier for the government to silence opinions it disagrees with. This isn't just a domestic concern, it's a diplomatic issue. Britain has long been a champion of free thought and open debate, but under Starmer it's beginning to resemble a surveillance state, and world leaders are taking notice. And not in a good way.
Connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group.
Starmer can talk about democracy as much as he wants, but actions speak louder than words. Right now, his actions are sending a different message. Britain is no longer the strong, free nation it once was. He wants to project the image of a capable and decisive leader. But behind the scenes, allies are already questioning whether Britain, under his leadership, can still be trusted as a serious global player. The UK was once a dominant force in world affairs, shaping international policy and standing firm in its principles. Under Starmer, that influence is fading fast. This wasn't a minor policy dispute, it was a direct contradiction that shattered the image Starmer had worked so hard to cultivate. Whether it was about the UK's global influence, its stance on free speech, or its role in international security, the Vice President's response made one thing clear. They weren't convinced. The message was undeniable. Under Starmer's leadership, Britain wasn't as strong, stable, or influential as he claimed. The room fell silent. Some diplomats exchanged knowing glances, others quickly jotted down notes, and a few seemed taken aback by the bluntness of the response. This wasn't just an uncomfortable moment, it was a public embarrassment.
Spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible. They're not interested in victims, they're interested in themselves. Those who are cheerleading Tommy Robinson, not interested in justice. They're supporting a man who went to prison for nearly collapsing a grooming case, a gang grooming case. These are people who are trying to get some kind of vicarious thrill from street violence that people like Tommy Robinson promote. And those attacking Jess Phillips, who I'm proud to call a colleague and a friend, not protecting victims. Jess Phillips has done 1,000 times more than they've even dreamt about when it comes to protecting victims of sexual abuse throughout her entire career. And so just as I took on the criminal justice system and the institutions when I was chief prosecutor, I'm prepared to call out this for what it is. We've seen this playbook many times, whipping up of intimidation and threats of violence.
Trump has never been known to tolerate anyone, particularly family members, who disappoint him or show disloyalty. This past year has seen the Labour Party openly supporting its political opponents during the 2024 United States elections, to name. But one example left a rather bitter taste in the mouth. Aside from being a mere diplomatic snub, it was much more a condemnation of leadership in general under Kier Starmer. Another says that it underlines his ignorance about how to manage multifaceted foreign affairs. leading Britain further into international obscurity. Starmer, who has been criticised over his leadership in dealing with immigration and other urgent issues, was challenged again over his capacity to provide Britain with a good representation. His critics only used to point out how he lacked the power to summon respect from strategic allies. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates like this.